Okay, so have you ever like gotten into one of those arguments where you walk away thinking like, how could they possibly think that?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
We're talking like those heated disagreements
Yeah.
from family drama to basically everything you see on Twitter these days.
Mhm.
And today we are diving deep into like the psychology of why we get so worked up about morality and politics.
Yeah.
And to help us with this, we're using a book by psychologist Kurt Gray called Outraged.
Great book.
It's a good one. And it's not just about understanding those arguments,
Right.
it's also about navigating them better.
Absolutely. And Gray doesn't waste any time getting to the heart of it.
Yeah.
He starts the book with this crazy story about a road rage incident he was in when he was 16
Oh, yeah.
that nearly killed him.
Yeah, I read that part.
It's intense.
It is so gripping. It wasn't just the danger, though.
Right.
It was like the other driver was so convinced that he was the one who was wronged.
Yeah.
It really makes you think.
It really highlights this fascinating point. So much of our outrage comes from how we each perceive harm.
Okay.
We get fired up when someone denies our suffering or just like refuses to acknowledge who we see as the real victim in a situation.
So is Gray saying that this harm perception,
Yeah.
is that like hardwired into us?
Well, he actually traces it back to like our evolutionary history.
Okay.
For a long time, the popular idea was that humans evolved as these like ruthless killer apes.
Right.
But newer evidence suggests a very different story.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
we're not the top predators we thought we were.
Not quite.
Okay.
Turns out early humans were more likely the prey.
Hmm.
So instead of hunting, we were constantly on edge, looking over our shoulders for danger.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and that constant threat really shaped our instincts in a profound way.
So like if you're always worried about being attacked, you
Yeah.
develop a pretty strong sense of what's dangerous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those ancient fears helped us evolve a hyper-focus on threats.
Ab-
And that's a legacy we still carry today.
I can see that.
And that's where the outrage comes in.
Okay.
It's like our internal alarm system going off,
Okay.
trying to protect us and our tribe.
Got it.
Even if the threat is just like a political disagreement
Yeah.
or someone cutting us off in traffic,
Right.
it all triggers that same ancient response.
But if we're so focused on protection,
Yeah,
why does it seem like there's so much destruction in the world?
that's where Gray gets really interesting.
Okay.
He argues that even when we're doing things that seem harmful, we usually believe we're acting in the name of protection.
Hmm.
It's this harm bias where almost all our moral judgments boil down to trying to prevent some kind of harm,
Okay.
even if it's not obvious at first.
I'm going to need an example for this one.
Okay, sure.
How can something like a political debate really be about preventing harm?
Well, think about the abortion debate.
Okay.
Those opposed to it often focus on the harm to the fetus. Those in favor often cite the potential harm to the woman's well-being and autonomy.
Oh, okay.
Both sides are motivated by protection,
I see.
just directed at different targets.
So you're saying it's not about like one side being good and the other bad.
Right.
It's more complicated than that.
It's way more nuanced than that. Yeah.
Okay.
We tend to create these destruction narratives about our opponents,
Yeah.
assuming the worst about their intentions.
Yeah.
But Gray's research suggests that most people genuinely believe they're doing the right thing, the protective thing, even if we disagree with their methods.
So then why do we so often assume the worst about people who disagree with us,
Right.
especially like on those really hot button issues?
Well, Gray suggests it's a combination of that ancient protect the tribe instinct
Okay.
and what he calls concept creep.
Concept creep. Whatever.
Basically like how the things we consider harmful have expanded over time.
Can you explain concept creep a little more?
Sure. It's like how things that we used to consider normal, like kids playing outside unsupervised,
Right.
are now often seen as dangerous or harmful.
Yeah.
Gray calls this concept creep.
Okay.
As societies get safer overall,
Right.
we start labeling less severe issues as
Yeah.
harmful.
Got it.
And that fuels more outrage, even as the world is objectively improving.
So we're living in a world that's safer than ever, but we're also more outraged than ever.
It's a bit of a paradox, isn't
So it
it?
is, yeah.
It creates this constant tension.
Okay.
Our brains are still wired for those ancient threats,
Right.
but the threats themselves have become much more nuanced and complex.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
If we're all just like running around misinterpreting each other's intentions,
No.
is there any hope for actually bridging these divides?
Well, that's where things get really practical.
Okay.
Gray argues that throwing facts at the problem just doesn't work.
Hmm.
We tend to cherry-pick data to fit our existing beliefs.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. So instead, he suggests a pretty surprising solution. Stories.
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 Really? Yeah. How can that possibly help us understand these complex issues like politics and morality?
Well, because stories bypass our logical defenses
Okay.
and connect with us on an emotional level.
Interesting.
Yeah, he uses some really compelling examples,
Okay.
like how transgender canvassers reduced prejudice by simply sharing personal experiences of discrimination.
So by sharing their vulnerabilities, they were able to connect with people on a human level
Yeah,
and actually change minds.
exactly.
Wow.
Stories help us tap into that shared humanity,
Huh.
reminding us that even people who hold very different views are ultimately driven by similar desires to protect,
Yeah.
to belong, to make sense of the world.
Yeah.
It's powerful stuff.
It is.
Yeah. So those stories create like a little crack in that wall that we build up around our beliefs,
Yeah.
letting new perspectives seep in.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It's not about winning the argument, right?
Right.
It's about understanding where the other person is coming from.
Exactly. And Gray offers some really practical tips for bridging those divides.
Okay.
One of the biggest ones is just asking, like, what harm do they see?
Mm.
You know?
So instead of assuming that they're just being difficult or intentionally hurtful,
Right.
try to understand what they might be afraid of, what they might be trying to protect.
Exactly. It goes back to that harm bias we were talking about.
Yeah.
We're all wired to protect, even if we're protecting different things.
Right.
Another tip is to share your own vulnerabilities
Mm.
instead of just attacking their views.
That's a tough one.
It is.
Especially like when you're feeling angry or attacked yourself.
Yeah.
But I guess it helps to create a more open and honest conversation.
It does when you share your own fears and insecurities.
Right.
It makes it easier for the other person to do the same.
Yeah.
It humanizes you.
Okay.
And then Gray's third tip is probably the most challenging. Assume good intent,
Oh,
even when you're outraged.
that's hard.
Yeah.
Isn't that a bit naive, though?
Right.
Like, what if the other person is genuinely trying to cause harm?
It's not about being naive.
Okay.
It's about creating the conditions for like a productive conversation.
Okay.
If you go in assuming the worst, you're basically guaranteeing a fight.
Right. So it's like choosing to believe that most people are trying to do the right thing,
Yeah.
even if they're going about it in a way you disagree with.
Exactly. And Gray's research actually backs this up.
Okay.
He did this study where he asked Democrats and Republicans to guess how much the other side approved of things like,
Yeah.
well, really horrible things I won't repeat here.
I read about that study.
Yeah.
Pretty shocking results.
Yeah, both groups wildly overestimated how much the other side condoned those awful acts.
Wow.
It just shows how easily we fall into this trap of dehumanizing our opponent.
Right. Like we just automatically assume that they're morally bankrupt.
Yeah,
If they disagree with us on something important.
right. But the reality is most people are motivated by the same basic desires
Okay.
to protect themselves, their loved ones, their values. We just sometimes go about it in very different ways.
So it's not just about like facts and logic.
Right.
It's about understanding those deeper motivations.
Exactly. And that's where Gray's idea of concept creep comes in again.
Okay.
As societies become safer,
Right.
our definition of harm expands.
Okay.
What might have been seen as a minor annoyance in the past
Right.
can now trigger intense outrage.
It's like how people get upset about things on social media that they might have just like shrugged off a few years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not that those things aren't important.
Right.
It's just that our sensitivity to harm has increased
Okay.
as the actual dangers in the world have decreased.
That's such an interesting paradox.
Yeah,
We're objectively safer than ever,
right.
but we're also more outraged than ever.
It's a sign of progress, in a way.
Why so?
Well, it shows that we're becoming more attuned to subtle forms of suffering,
Okay.
more aware of the experiences of others.
So how do we navigate this world of like heightened sensitivity?
Yeah.
How do we channel that outrage into something positive
Right.
rather than just letting it tear us apart?
Gray argues that we need to channel our vigilance,
Okay.
those ancient instincts
Yeah.
that kept our ancestors alive,
Right.
into understanding, not annihilation.
So instead of reacting with anger and fear,
Right.
we need to pause and try to see the world through the other person's eyes.
Exactly. Remember that road rage incident from the beginning of the book?
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of how our perception of threat can completely distort our view of reality.
And how quickly those ancient fear responses can kick in,
Yeah.
even when the threat isn't really a threat at all.
Exactly. So next time you find yourself getting outraged,
Yeah.
take a deep breath and ask yourself, what harm are they really afraid of?
It's about choosing understanding over annihilation,
Yes.
connection over conflict.
Exactly. And remembering that even in our anger,
Yeah.
even in our outrage,
Right.
we're all connected by that shared desire to protect,
Okay.
to create a world where we can all thrive.
That's a powerful message.
It's
And it makes me think about all those stories Gray shares in the book.
Yeah.
Like the black musician Daryl Davis, who befriended over 200 KKK members.
That's an incredible example of the power of listening,
right.
of choosing empathy over anger.
He actually got those KKK members to leave the organization.
Wow.
Simply by talking to them.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
By understanding their fears and motivations.
It sounds impossible, but it happened.
It did.
And it's a reminder that even in the darkest corners of human experience, there's always a glimmer of hope,
Right.
a possibility for connection and understanding.
It's about choosing to see the human behind the villain, as Gray puts it.
Exactly. And that's where true progress lies.
Yeah.
Not in silencing or defeating our opponent,
Right.
but in understanding them.
So what can we do as individuals to move in that direction?
Well, it starts with those 3 simple steps. Gray outlines.
Okay.
Ask, what harm do they see? Share your own vulnerabilities.
Right.
And assume good intent.
Yeah.
They might seem small, but they can have a huge impact on how we approach those difficult conversations.
It's about shifting our mindset from combat to curiosity.
Exactly. And remembering that even when we disagree vehemently, there's often more that unites us than divides us.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we're all walking around with these invisible shields,
Right.
just ready to deflect any perceived attack.
Yeah, it's true. And that defensiveness really makes it so much harder to have those, like, productive conversations,
Right.
the kind that can actually lead to change.
So how do we break down those walls?
Yeah.
Is it even possible in today's climate?
Gray argues that it is.
Okay.
He reminds us that this outrage, this heightened sensitivity, is actually a sign of progress.
Wait, hold on. How can outrage be a good thing? It seems like it's tearing us apart.
It's all about perspective.
Okay.
The fact that we're now outraged by things like microaggressions,
Right.
by subtle forms of bias.
Yeah.
It actually shows that we've made significant strides in addressing the more overt, more harmful behaviors that were just commonplace in the past.
So we're evolving as a society.
Yeah.
Becoming more attuned to the experiences of others.
Exactly.
Even in those subtlest forms.
Our outrage, even when it feels messy and unproductive, is a sign that we're no longer willing to tolerate injustice,
Okay.
even in its most insidious forms.
So we're holding ourselves to a higher standard,
Yeah,
demanding a more just and equitable world.
precisely.
Right.
And while it's easy to get caught up in, like, the negativity of outrage,
Right.
it's important to remember that this heightened sensitivity,
Yeah.
it's a sign that we're moving in the right direction.
So instead of just viewing outrage as like a purely destructive force,
Right.
we can actually see it as evidence of our moral progress, a sign that we're becoming more compassionate and aware.
It's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is. So how do we like harness this outrage, this awareness of harm,
Right.
and channel it into something positive?
Yeah.
How do we avoid getting stuck in that like endless cycle of anger and division?
Gray suggests that we need to tap into that ancient vigilance.
Okay.
Those same instincts that protected our ancestors, but instead of using them for fight, we use them to understand.
So instead of reacting with that like knee-jerk outrage,
Right.
we pause, take a breath,
Yeah.
and try to understand the other person's perspective.
Exactly. Remember that road rage story Gray opens with?
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of how quickly our perception of threat can just totally distort reality.
And how those ancient fear responses can just like take over.
Yeah.
Even when the threat is totally misconstrued.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
So next time you feel that outrage rising up,
Yeah.
try to step back,
Okay.
take a breath,
Right.
and just ask yourself, what harm do they see?
It's about choosing understanding over annihilation.
Yes.
Connection over conflict.
Precisely. And remembering that even in our outrage,
Yeah.
even when we feel completely opposed to someone,
Right.
we're still connected by that shared human desire to protect, to create a world where we feel safe and secure.
That's such a powerful reminder.
It is.
We might disagree on the methods,
Right.
But ultimately, we're all striving for a better world.
Exactly, and that's why stories are so important.
Yeah.
They help us connect on a deeper level,
Right.
beyond just the facts and arguments,
Yeah.
and tap into that shared humanity.
Like the story of Daryl Davis,
Right.
the black musician who befriended over 200 KKK members.
Powerful story.
It's a testament to the transformative power of listening,
Absolutely.
of choosing empathy over anger.
And a reminder that even in the darkest corners of human experience,
Yeah.
there's always that glimmer of hope,
Mm.
a possibility for understanding and connection.
So for our listeners who are feeling overwhelmed by all the outrage in the world,
Yeah.
what's like the key takeaway here? What can they do to make a difference?
Start with those 3 simple steps Gray suggests.
Yeah.
Ask, what harm do they see?
Right.
Share your own vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And assume good intent, even when it's hard.
It's about choosing curiosity over judgment,
Yeah.
empathy over anger,
Mm.
understanding over annihilation.
It's not always easy,
Right.
but it's essential if we want to create a world where outrage is tempered by compassion
Yeah.
and our differences are met with understanding.
And that's really what this whole deep dive into Outraged has been all about, right?
It has.
Understanding the roots of our outrage,
Mhm.
the harm bias that shapes our perceptions,
Mhm.
and finding ways to bridge those divides
Right.
that seem to be tearing us apart.
It's been a journey into the heart of human nature.
It has.
A reminder
Yeah.
that even in our anger,
Yeah.
even in our most heated disagreements,
Mm.
there's a possibility for connection and understanding.
So the next time you're faced with outrage, remember those 3 steps
Absolutely.
and choose to see the human behind the villain, as Gray puts it.
Remember that we're all in this together,
Yeah.
and that even small acts of empathy and understanding can have a ripple effect,
Right.
creating a more compassionate and connected world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
If you're craving more explorations of human nature, hit subscribe and stay curious.